Okay, it is 6 o'clock and we're going to start. Welcome everyone. This is the CalTPA Review and Refresh, and we're hosting this from the Association of Independent California Colleges and Universities with Education Programs. And so when we have met with all of the universities, they've indicated that CalTPA support is needed across the state. So we're offering this to anyone across the state who just wants some more information, want to review and refresh their knowledge on the 2 cycles for CalTPA. Tonight, we're going to focus on cycle 1. And I am Dr. Allison Smith. I'm a professor at University of Massachusetts Global, and I'm the president of AICCU-ED. And I have with me Darrell Blanks. He will also be co-hosting. He is a board member of AICCU-ED and faculty at Fresno Pacific University. And we have just over 60 people joining us tonight. So we are going to be providing you this overview of cycle 1 and really unpacking it. Here attending, we have faculty members, staff members, current candidates, new teachers. So we have across the board people who are interested in the CalTPA. And so this is really tonight just a chance for us to unpack the CalTPA for you. You hopefully have looked at the performance assessment guide that has all of the information, but sometimes it's difficult just to read through a PDF document and fully understand what you need to do. So we're here to help you understand and just kind of break it down so it's really accessible and just makes sense. So Darrell, do you want to add anything?
No, just welcome. Hopefully we can help answer your questions and put you at ease and put you on the path to getting this completed, because many of you are waiting to get this done so you can look forward to getting your clear credentials. So we're here to serve you.
Exactly. Thanks, Darrell. Okay, so in this workshop, we're going to talk about some different resources. We're going to give you an overview of cycle 1. And then we're also going to go into depth about each step, just kind of break it down and make it accessible. And then at the end, we're hoping we'll have time for questions. I'll also be able to stop here and there and ask if anybody has questions. But as I'm looking at how many participants we have, that might need to wait till the end so we can actually get through all of this information for you. So that's what you can expect tonight. And I am so impressed by all of you spending your evening here talking CalTPA. So first things first, I already mentioned it, the performance assessment guide. This really is your best resource. It literally has everything you need to know. Everything is in there. And I understand that's not always the best way to learn, is reading through a document. And we're educators. We know people learn in different ways. And so that's why things like this workshop help just unpack it a little more in talking through it. And there's 3 different assessment guides. You have one for multiple subject, and then single subject, and then world languages. So you're going to want to select the one that matches the credential you're going for. They're slightly different. The multiple subject and single subject is very similar, but world languages takes a little different approach just because it's world languages. If for some reason you're here and you're interested in the new CalTPA for education specialist, we are not covering the new ed specialist CalTPA. We're trying to maybe look into doing that for the spring or next fall, but right now this is just for multiple subject, single subject, and world languages. Okay, so the first step, may have already done this, but I think it's good to just talk about the basics and share. The first thing to do, log into the CalTPA. You're going to go to the assessment tab. This is the link. You're going to register for the CalTPA. I recommend you do this sooner than later, because registering, you get all of the updated information. So they're now using the version 5 templates. So you want to make sure you're actually using the most current templates. And when you register, you get all of that information. And also the assessment guide. You want the most current information. You also want to get comfortable using the system. So you don't want to be the day you're there to submit and it's maybe the submission deadline and you're stressing out. So you've spent all this time stressing out to actually build up and write your CalTPA. And then you're the last day really struggling to upload it to the system. So it's best that you just kind of get a lay of the land and understand how to upload and all of the expectations. I also recommend that you upload, especially your videos, a couple days in advance, because on that submission day, if you think about it, everyone across the state who's wanting to submit, they're submitting on that same day, and systems sometimes get overloaded. So avoid the stress, the technical difficulties, do it a few days before. I always think about it, you know, if something's going to go wrong, it's going to happen when I'm on a deadline. And I just want to first start with the big picture. I think sometimes we get into it like, okay, I've got to do this and this and this, but we don't think about the big picture. So for cycle 1, the big picture, it's focused on planning a lesson that builds on the assets of your students. So they really want to know that you can design a lesson that's made exactly for the students that you have and builds on all of the wonderful funds of knowledge that they have. They have assets, they have experiences that you can really leverage to get them fully engaged and successful in meeting learning goals and standards. And so that's the big picture. So as you're working on this, cycle 1, keep that in mind. Am I developing a lesson that builds on the assets of my students? And we'll talk about it more, but just keep that big picture in mind. And the big picture for cycle 2 is different. Cycle 2 is focused on assessments and assessing learning and looking at the assessment data to plan another lesson. So that's more of the focus of cycle 2. So for cycle 1, it's designing one lesson that builds on the assets of your students. So always keep the big picture in mind. And there are 4 steps to the CalTPA for cycle 1 and cycle 2. So you start with plan, then teach and assess, reflect, and then apply. And so this is the structure. And so you have templates that go with the planning, and then the teach and assess, and then reflect, and then apply. Same goes for cycle 2. So when you go into cycle 2, it's nice. You already know the structure and you can really use that. It's different, but the structure is the same. So now I'm going to briefly go over each step and the evidence you need to submit. Then I'm going to go into further detail of what to do within each step for those different pieces of evidence. So step 1 is plan. So you're going to have a template for getting to know your students. Then you're going to have another template for your lesson plan. Then you have another one, lesson plan rationale. And then the 4th one is instructional materials and resources. And don't get overwhelmed by 4 documents. They all go together. So you need to write about who your students are. You got to write what you're going to teach them in the lesson plan. You're going to have to write why. Why would you design a lesson like that? We don't just teach for no reason. and just throw a lesson out there. It needs to be intentional. And so that's where you write about that in the rationale. And then the materials and resources, that's anything you would need to be able to teach that lesson. So any visuals, your PowerPoints, your videos, your anything like that that you would need to teach the lesson, you're going to just put it all together in a document and submit it. It's that simple. Then we're going to go to step 2, teach and assess. And this is where you're going to have 3 video clips. So you're going to record the entire lesson that you plan from step 1. You're going to record it all. Then you're going to pick out 3 different clips. And in those, we're going to talk more in more detail about the clips, but you're going to do that. And then you're going to do annotations. And that's basically a time-stamped comment. Like in this video, at this exact point, this is what's happening. And you explain it. And you're essentially providing information, contextual information for the assessor. They can see what they're seeing, but you're then just explaining why and explaining the importance of it. And again, we're going to go into more detail about it. This is just an overview for you. And then step 3 is reflect. This is a written narrative. You have a template and it has prompts. So you're not just writing, looking at a blank piece of paper or a blank document on your computer. You have prompts to guide you in what you need to answer. And so you're going to fill that out and reflect on how it went, planning and teaching, and really reflect. And we'll talk more about that. And then step 4, apply. This is also a narrative, or you can do a video. And this is where you explain what would the next steps be. Like if you were to teach this again, what would you do? And then what would be the next lesson you would teach based on what your students learned? So it's using your reflection to then plan for what's coming next, which essentially this is capturing great teaching. It's nothing extra, additional, or different. This is you showing and showcasing the great teaching you can do. So I mentioned the assessment guides. The second best resource, which is in the assessment guides, is the rubrics. So I want to talk about this before I unpack everything, because I think it's really important and also an underutilized resource is these rubrics. The rubrics are toward the back of the assessment guides, and they are exactly what the assessors use to score you. You know exactly what they're looking for. So be smart and use those and check your own work as you're developing it against those rubrics. You've got that's the magic sauce. That's the secret. You've got it. It's no secret at all. So those are there, and I will tell you how to read them and walk through them and use them to self-assess your own work. So for cycle 1, there are 8 rubrics, and you get a score for each rubric. You get a score of 1 to 5. So you don't want to get a 1 or a 2. You at least want to get a 3. Fabulous if you get a 4. Amazing if you get a 5. A 5's kind of a unicorn, but I've seen candidates get it. So it is possible. But if you get all 3s, you should be very proud of your work and feel good about it. So for cycle 1, you need to score a 19 or more to pass across those 8 rubrics. And you can only have a score of 1, 1. So you can have a rubric that scores a 1, and then you nail it on everything else, you could still pass. But you really want to avoid anything in the 1 and 2. So I like to read I recommend people read what's in column 1 and 2 so they know what not to do. It's it's wonderful. I don't want to do this. I don't want to appear like I'm doing this, because an assessor is going to be looking and you don't want them to move to the 1 or 2. So be really solid with that 3. And I'm going to walk you through that. Each rubric is framed by an essential question. So I told you the big picture on what you need to keep in mind. Well, these essential questions are essentially the big picture of each rubric, so you know what you're being scored on. I also want to point out 4 of the 8 rubrics are all about planning. So you can be strategic and you can really understand what do I need to spend a lot of time on? Well, half my score comes from this step 1 planning. It's not the case in cycle 2, but for cycle 1, the emphasis is on planning. So make sure you spend a lot of time on the documents that make up planning. These other ones are important too, but you can see you're going to want to really have a strong plan. And now I'm going to do a walkthrough of the rubric so you know exactly how to self-assess and you know how an assessor looks at your work. So the Pearson and the CTC are very transparent about what the expectations are, if you know how to use their rubrics and you actually utilize them. So this is an example of rubric 1.1. And so you would want to do this for every rubric. So so first you start with level 3. That's where an assessor goes, is level 3. And then they go construct by construct. So these little chunks of words, those are what they call constructs. So they're going to look at each construct and try to find it in the evidence. And they're only going to look at the evidence for the rubric. And here you can see sources of evidence, part A, B, C, and D. So they're only, for these constructs, only going to look in these 4 documents to try to find them. And assessors truly are trying to find them. They do want you to pass. They want you to do well. So make it obvious for them so they can find what they're looking for. So they're going to read the first one. Candidates' lesson planning includes manageable and specific learning goals that clearly build on students' prior content knowledge. So you're going to want to know and look in your writing, did I make this obvious? Or how can I strengthen this? And they're going to go down to the next construct. To get a score of a 3, you have to have every construct very clear and very obvious. So the assessor, if the assessor finds that all of these evident in your 4 documents, then they go up to level 4 and they see those 2 constructs. And if they find the evidence, then you would get a 4 and they would look at 5 to see if you have these constructs evident. Now, let's say they saw everything in 3 and they only saw one thing on level 4, then you've got a score of a 3. You got a solid 3. If for some reason they don't find one of these constructs or more, then they're going to go down to a level 2 and a level 1 and decide which is most appropriate for your work. So that's how they come up with the scores. Again, read through the level 1 and 2 and take note of what not to do or what not to have in your writing. If anything is kind of suggesting any of those things, that's where you know you need to strengthen your work. So at least you'll get the 3. Try for the 4, try for the 5. I always push people, try for as high as possible. Shoot for the moon. And, you know, if you get a 3, you're okay. But if you shoot for a 5, I mean, that would be fabulous. Darrell, did you want to add anything to the walkthrough?
Yeah, I think one thing to kind of remember is when you look at the rubrics, and you look at the level one in particular, the level one most of the time has the things you have omitted to do. A good case in point is when you look at the videos, there are some things in the video that you have to annotate for. If you leave those out, you end up in the column one. So take a look at the column one and see what you cannot absolutely leave out. And then plan for that in your planning before you do your video. So when you go to annotate it, it's all sitting right there waiting for you.
Absolutely. And I recommend to people, read the rubrics before you start, so you kind of know what the target is. Read them while you're writing and working on your videos, so you know you're on track. And then after you've got your draft, you think it's solid, go through and you put on your assessor hat and you see if you can find all that evidence, and do that before you submit to Pearson. Those are ways to set yourself up for success. So now we are going to unpack each step and talk in more detail. So step one, plan. Again, this is the big chunk. You really want to spend the time on this. So first, you're investigating, you want to research who your students are, get to know them, what they like, their interest, gather their test scores, find out about home life, past experiences with the content. You're going to want to really spend that effort in getting the information. And if you're co-teaching, ask your co-teacher. If there are other people in the school who know the students, you can reach out and ask them. You can do surveys for your students. You can do some initial projects and activities with them so you can start to learn about them. And then the next is to write the lesson, one lesson that builds on who your students are. So you can't build a lesson on who your students are if you don't know them. So you are going to spend that time investigating who they are. And it's really great to look at that template to see what the different things you need to write about. Their interests, their funds of knowledge, their different assets, their cultural and linguistic backgrounds, their prior knowledge pertaining to that specific content. And you can look at what they did in the previous unit or the class to really inform what you're writing about. I think that some people want to jump into just, I'm planning this lesson and then go. I would recommend you not do that, because the lesson has to build on who those students are. So if you, let's say, go to Teachers Pay Teachers, you find a fabulous lesson and you teach it, that's not tailored to who your students are. So you can certainly be inspired by a lesson from someone else that someone else has developed, but you really need to tailor it to who your students are. And because if we go back to the overview, the big picture, that's what this is all about. So get to know them so you can include those kind of things, like how you're structuring your lesson, the examples you use, the content, everything can build on the strengths of your students. And you really want to take this asset-based approach. So it's expected that teachers don't focus on the deficits. So you're not going to focus on what your students don't know and what they can't do. You're going to focus, well, what can they do? What do they know? And build on that to get them where they're meeting the learning goals and hitting all those standards they need to. So you get to know them, then you develop this amazing, engaging lesson. It's one lesson. So if you're multiple subject, it's just one lesson in the day. It's not the whole day. If you're single subject, it's not all of your students. You're just writing about one class period. And those are the students you are teaching to. And then you're going to explain why you made all those lesson plan decisions. And that's what you do in the rationale. So it's who your students are, what you're going to teach, and then you go to the lesson plan rationale. Why are you teaching it that way? And essentially, you should be explaining that you are building a lesson based on the assets of your students and what they already know and all of those things I've mentioned. And then you're also going to gather the materials and resources needed to teach that lesson. A lot of this happens naturally at the same time. It's just organized in 4 different documents. Like if I'm developing a lesson, I'm also at the same time gathering materials, and I'm also thinking about, well, why am I even teaching it this way? So it's the natural lesson planning. It's just about writing it out so then you can showcase that you can teach this way, and the assessors can look at it and see, okay, they are asset-based, they're building a lesson based on the assets of their students, and they can be very intentional about the lesson. Darrell, did you want to add anything to that?
No, you did a great job covering that.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. I did want to put this in. So really important because, and the last time I taught or I held a workshop like this, I didn't have this slide because it was during the previous iteration of the CalTPA, where the standards and the learning goals for the content, it was there, but the ELD standards and ELD learning goals weren't as, I guess, up front and center. And this is where a lot of candidates and new teachers that are submitting cycle 1 are getting condition code. Now, condition codes are basically you didn't do the requirement, you're not getting a score, they kick it back to you to fix whatever is missing for that condition code. And then you need to resubmit, which means you need to pay again, you need to go through the process and the waiting. So I wanted to add this slide just so you were very clear on what you need to do specifically for the ELD standards and the learning goals. And these are examples that the CTC has put together. They really made it obvious what needs to happen, which was really needed because a lot of people were confused. So here is a fabulous screenshot from the CTC presentation, citing ELD standards and building learning goals. So they tell you, cut and paste the standard directly from the ELD standard document. And so this is a screenshot of what you need to include. They've circled exactly what needs to be included. And here you can see how they cited it. So in your lesson plan, you're going to write out the content standard and the content learning goal, which most people can do that, and that's fine. But then when you get to the ELD standard, there was confusion about how to write it. So this is exactly an example of how to write it. And it's a copy and paste. So I would definitely use this as kind of just your guide to how to write it. And then how to develop a learning goal based on that standard. And so here are 2 examples of ELD learning goals that are based on the ELD standard. So you have to have a standard, and then your learning goal needs to be connected to that standard, but not just restating the standard. And Darrell, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but this is a really important point in my opinion.
Sorry about that. I was responding to a question in the chat about where this recording will be after we're done. No, I think you said that well. The only thing I might add is when you talk about doing the adaptations for your EL focused student, you might think about their particular developmental need when you make that connection. But for the general ELD, you don't need to have those developmental levels.
Great. Okay, which is a perfect segue into our focus students. So for cycle 1, you need to choose 3 focus students. Your focus student 1, and you'll refer to the focus students as FS1, FS2, and FS3. You don't use their names or any identifiers. You don't write your school name, any of that stuff. You need to just leave out. And so you always refer to the student as FS1, FS2, and FS3. So FS1 is an English language learner. So their primary language is anything other than English, and it's identified in the home language survey. You can also, if you don't have any English language learners, you can choose someone who needs extra support with the English language. This is mostly happening maybe in some of the school districts that are less diverse, which is not ideal. As you're, becoming an educator, you should be in a classroom where you have a range of students. But in the instance you don't have an English learner, there's a way to do it, and it's just fine. You do not have an option to not have a focus student. So you can't say, I don't have any English learners, I'm not going to have focus students. That doesn't work. And if you look in your assessment guide, you can find more information about the different ways to fulfill FS1 if you don't have a designated language learner. FS2 is a student who has an IEP 504 or designated as GATE. Here again, if you don't have any students in those designations, then there are other options, and it's all outlined in the assessment guide. But ideally, you would have a student who has an IEP, a 504, or designated as GATE, and you need to be able to show that you can meet the needs of them as well. And then focus student 3. Now, this is sometimes a little more tricky because it's not a student who has a designation. It's really easy to see, okay, this student has an IEP, this student's an English learner. Okay, I got data behind me. I've got this and that. For FS3, it's a student with life experiences that are impacting them in your classroom, either academically or emotionally. So it could be a lot of different things. So it could be someone who's being bullied. Maybe their family's going through a divorce, some kind of trauma, homelessness, incarceration, LGBTQ+. These are all different kind of life experiences as examples that can be utilized. The key here is it's impacting them in the classroom academically or emotionally. So for instance, a child could have a family going through divorce, but be completely okay, and is no academic or emotional extra support needed in the class. That would not be someone you would want to choose for FS3. You want to choose someone that needs additional supports. And what's the whole point of focus students? Well, it is to showcase that you can support the whole class, and you can support the range of learners that you're probably going to have in your classroom. And so that's the whole purpose of having focus students in cycle 1. And Darrell, jump in if you want to add anything.
Yeah, let me ask a couple of questions from the chat, actually. So one is, will the slides will there be access to the slides? I know that this is being recorded. It's going to be posted CTC YouTube channel, but what about the slides?
We're not going to share the slides, but the YouTube will be on the CCTE YouTube channel.
Okay, and then another question that we get a lot, because we have a lot of DI classes in the Fresno area. What if we are teaching in Spanish? Who will my FS1 person be? So I imagine one of those contexts is high school Spanish. Another context would be a dual immersion setting. So maybe you can take a second and share
Absolutely
those two contexts.
Okay, so Everything I'm talking about is mostly for multiple subject, single subject. If you are in world languages, you're teaching in another language, you're going to use the world languages assessment guide. And in there, it explains that it's a little different. So for Focus Student 1, it's going to be a heritage learner. And that's what you're going to focus on. So you're going to need to look in that assessment guide, and you'll see a few differences just based on you're not teaching in English. So Focus Student 1 is a prime example of one of the major differences between multiple subject, single subject, and then world languages. Any other questions in there, Darrell?
I was just getting ready to answer one. Can Focus Student 3 also have an IEP? I was about ready to say, yes, that's true, but Focus Student 2 and Focus Student 3 have to be different students. No double dipping on the students. You can't have an EL with a traumatic event who also has an IEP and run them 3 ways. You got to have 3 different students. And then can a student in a single parent home with 8 siblings be Focus Student 3? The salient question is, has it created a situation where they need academic or emotional support? So it's not the event that qualifies, it's the impact of the event on the student in school.
Okay, let's see. So researching your students, figuring out who they are, look at their LPAC scores, definitely. Achievement in previous units, courses, grades connected to the content you're teaching in the lesson. Student survey of interest, experiences, families. These, I've mentioned them already, but these are great ways to find out more about your students. Sometimes you're in situations where you're like, well, I don't really know these students and I've got to do this, and the CalTPA and I don't have time. Well, here's some things. You do need to make the time to get to know them. And if they have IEPs, read those IEPs. You need to look at what the goals are, what the accommodations are, because you need to integrate that into your lesson and show that you can support students. Now we're going to jump to Teach and Assess, step 2. There are 2 rubrics for Teach and Assess. And the first thing you want to do, read those. Darrell's already mentioned that level 1 really is things that are just completely missing from the videos. This is the whole video and annotation. If you're missing it from the video, I mean, it's just not there. You can't annotate yourself into that. Like, you can't change your writing to fulfill those requirements. It's simply not there. So before you teach and record, know what the target is. So review the rubrics, look at everything, level 3, try for 4 and 5, avoid 1 and 2. Teach your 1 lesson. It's just 1 lesson. And 1 day, and video record the entire lesson. You do not want to just video little chunks, because you're setting yourself up to be like, well, what if that little chunk didn't capture what I need it to? So I like to just get everything so I would know and I would have a lot to work with. And so that's what I recommend for you. So then you're going to watch your entire video, probably cringe because we all hate hearing ourselves talk, and see how we are on the video, but watch it. And then you're going to choose 3 clips that are up to 5 minutes each, and that fulfill the requirements for each clip, which I'm going to tell you, and you're going to know exactly what you need to do. Then you're going to write just a few 2 to 3 strong annotations for the video clip. And you have 5 titles that you have to use. And so those titles are from cycle 1. When you get in the Pearson system, you upload your video, and then for the annotation, it's a drop down. And so you're going to choose between those 5 titles. And it's just a way to organize what you are writing about. And I think it's helpful too, to keep you focused on what you need to write about. Each title needs to be used at least one time across the 3 videos. And most likely you're going to use them multiple times. You're not just going to use them once. And make sure you and the students are visible. So do not have a video camera of you talking. Some people have done that, just the videos on them. That's not enough. We need to show the students, or it's only on one student or just the students. You need to show that you're there too. So definitely do that, because that's also a condition code that comes up, is that the students and the teacher are not visible. So now we're going to unpack the video clips. I know you're all waiting patiently. Well, what do I need to do? Well, here I'm going to tell you. Clip 1, creating a positive and safe learning environment for your students. Okay, this is a lot for the clip, but I'm going to unpack it. Connecting to prior learning and establishing expectations for content-specific learning. And you might be thinking, wow, how do I do that within 5 minutes? That seems crazy. Well, this is how you're going to do it. You set a positive, it's probably going to happen at the beginning of the lesson. You're setting up a positive learning environment. Maybe you're greeting the students, you're having maybe an SEL check-in, you're having dialogue, connecting with them, just creating this nice, safe, positive environment. Then you're going to talk about the prior learning. Like, hey, remember yesterday or the last time we met, we were talking about whatever it is. And then you're going to establish the expectations for the content-specific learning. Building on what we just were learning, today we are going to do X, Y, and Z, and you're going to explain what they're going to do. You can do that within 5 minutes. It sounds scarier than it is, but you're doing something to create that positive and safe learning environment. You're reminding them what they already know. And then you're going to tell them how today is going to build on what they already know and what exactly they're going to do for the day. What are they going to learn in this content and be able to do by the end? So that's what you're going to do for clip 1. Clip 2, students' activities and your instructional strategies. Now that seems kind of broad, and well, what does that mean? So it's not, I'll tell you first what it's not. It is not you lecturing students with direct instruction. There's a place for direct instruction. This would not be the place for direct instruction. You want a video of students actively engaged in an activity, engaging in higher order thinking. So they're not just memorizing, they're not just recalling, like, it has to be something where there's some analysis and synthesis, and it's an activity. And you might be walking around assessing, they're actively engaged. That's what that clip should really look like. And then clip 3 is next steps for content-specific learning. So that's probably going to happen at the end of the lesson. You're going to wrap it up. So and this is just good teaching. You don't just end a lesson. Okay, that was it. The bell has rung, bye. No, you bring it together. Hey, today we talked about X, Y, and Z. Tomorrow or the next time we meet, we're going to build on what we learned and do whatever it is. And so you're making the connection for the learner. And that's always just good practice. Instead of leaving a learner hanging, they're more likely to they understand what they learned in the day, and they know what they're going to be doing the next time. And then the next time you meet, connect it back. And it's always this continual chain of connection. So the learner knows with purpose that what they're learning and what they're doing. So that's the intent of those video clips. Throwing it to you, Darrell. What do you have?
No, I think you did a great job. I want to reiterate that before you do your plan, It's really, really important. And then we'll answer the question that Caitlin just posted. It's really important that you look at what the video clips require before you plan your lesson. When you get ready to teach that lesson, you should know where all the annotations are going to come from. The mistake is to teach the lesson, videotape it, and then try to do the annotations. The annotations should be planned into your lesson. Far and away, that's the mistake I've seen by folks I've met with at our institution who end up with ones on one of the two rubrics for the video clips, is they just don't do that. And then we have a question from Caitlin. Do any of the clips need to be us near the focus students?
No.
There's no annotations for the focus students. It's assumed they're in your classroom there somewhere, but you don't point them out. You don't put a little sign above them or, you know, any kind of thing, walk by and go, you know, like that. They're just part of your class. And really the emphasis for the video is really making sure you clearly demonstrate what you're going to annotate for. That should really be the target of those clips. That's why you just pick some things. And yes, a mentor teacher can appear in the video. You're supposed to be in charge of the class. Like, it's supposed to be your class, you're running the class. Want to be a little careful with having them in there teaching alongside you, things like that. I typically give, and I'll let Allison give her advice. Yes, Miles. I typically have the mentor teacher videotape. I say you record, and then they don't accidentally end up in the video, or they don't accidentally say something that gets in the way. That's a good job for the mentor teacher. That way you're clearly in charge. Allison, you want to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Two things. Yeah, the mentor teacher can be doing stuff, but you don't want them taking the lead and sometimes it accidentally happens, especially if something's kind of starting to spiral and they just can't help it and they want to help. And so behind the camera is a great position because they kind of have to then do their job with the camera. The other thing is, it makes me so sad when I work with a candidate and they're like, oh, I didn't connect it to prior learning. And I didn't say next steps for learning at the end of the lesson. I'm like, I'm sorry, it doesn't meet the expectations. And so if you know in advance, you have to do those things and you keep that in mind, you're going to set yourself up to be more successful.
Yeah. And maybe add one other little thing about the filming is before the day you do your TPA, you should plan to practice filming with whatever device you're going to use. That's the other thing. It's sad. You have an awesome lesson, you use the device or whatever you're using, and you realize you can't hear anybody, or you realize that it does some weird thing. Practice before you use that device. That'll put you kind of at ease when you go to teach. The other piece is realize you're taking samples of the lesson. So if you have some anomalous thing happen, don't let that derail your lesson. It never should anyhow as a teacher. Kid yells out, kid does some kind of thing. Just film it all and pick your spot.
Yeah, absolutely. And it needs to be continuous and unedited within the 5 minutes. So you're going to get your 5-minute clip. You can't cut things out. So I'll just tell you a story. I had a candidate I was working with, and she taught this fabulous lesson, and this clip, it was perfect. But at one part, her skirt kind of started rising up, like somehow her jacket had caught her skirt, and she was super embarrassed because it was on this video. And she asked me, can I just cut that out? And so it's then within the 5 minutes, but then within that, I'm going to just cut the skirt out. No, you can't do that. I told her it's not, like, obviously a little embarrassing that happened and got caught on video, but the clip fit it, it's okay. You cannot edit out a student maybe not being the way you want, or your skirt going up, or You making a weird face, you can't cut it out. If it's within the 5 minutes, that's the 5 minutes. And the assessor's not looking at that. The assessor's looking for what's on the rubric. That's all. There's no marking down for your skirt looked funny.
We've both scored these for the state. And so when you're looking at this, you want to see just a normal classroom. I've seen kids looking back and making weird faces at the video. I've seen some weird thing over in the corner. Don't be so consumed with that. Also realize the video can be no more than 5 minutes. So if you have an awesome clip and at 4 minutes and 35 seconds, you have the embarrassing thing happen, just make the video 4 minutes and 35 seconds, as long as you're not kicking out something you need to annotate for. It doesn't have to be 5 minutes.
No.
It has to be continuous. It can't be interrupted anyway.
Yeah, they don't focus on the length of the video clip. Just, it can't be over 5 minutes. That's it. If you can get everything in there in 3 minutes, that's fine. It really and
a quick question from the chat. Can the lesson be whole class or can it be a small group? The answer to that is it can be a small group if the grouping is purposeful. In template C, they're going to ask you what's your rationale for your grouping. If you're running a kindergarten station and you run kids through that station, and that's a regular part of how you've planned those lessons, then it can be a small group. It can't be one student, it has to be at least a small handful of students.
Okay, let's see. Looking at the time, I'm going to move on to step 3, reflect. So this, and it seems simple, but it's a reflection. I'm going to say that again. It is a reflection. I say that because a lot of times people just restate what happened. It's like a script of, okay, I did this, they did this, I did this. And there's no depth to it. There's no reflecting. It's just restating. And there is a difference. And if you can't get to the reflection, you're not doing what the expectations are for this template. So you're going to reflect on what you learned from teaching the lesson. Be like, wow, they did this. And, I planned it like this and it didn't really go the way I wanted. It's kind of like what you would, I always did this when I was a high school teacher. At the end of the day, every day I would write, not for a long time, but I would write how it went. And I would have my reflection and I would put it with the lesson. And then the next year when I would go to it, I would look at my reflection and I would see, wow, that didn't work. But I think it was just the group of students, not the lesson. And it didn't fit them because of whatever reason it is. If you just sit down and write out how it went, especially like right after you teach this, and just like you're writing in a journal for yourself, you can turn that into this template, and it will really help you with sitting down and writing the template. They want to see you going through that reflection process. Wow, this was really effective because this happened and this happened, and this was not effective because this student and that, and I didn't, or whatever happened. You want to be very specific and reflective and make reference to steps 1 and 2. So you have to cite evidence from steps 1 and 2. And sometimes that seems, you got to cite evidence. That sounds scary. It's not. It's just you backing up what you're saying. Wow, this was less effective. And here I'm going to tell you why. This student and this happened and the whole class, and you're explaining those details of exactly why. Maybe you're referencing something that happened that you did in the step 1 planning, and then in the teaching, the video clips. Yeah, as you could see in clip 2, this was happening. So, you're supporting what you're stating. And that's what citing the evidence is. Darrell, do you want to add something to that? Okay. This template is not very long. There's not a lot to it, but it's really critical that you get in that very specific and reflective mindset when you're writing. And then we get to the last step, step 4, apply. You've just planned this, you got to know your students, you planned a fabulous lesson that builds on who they are. You taught the lesson, recorded it, you reflected on how it went. Wow, that was great. Wow, that was terrible. And here's why. And now, what happens next? What would you do the next time? So in the apply step, you're going to write about if you were to, what you need to reteach based on what happened in the lesson. And then if you were to teach this exact lesson again, what would you do differently to improve like higher order thinking, academic language development, ways to further affirm the backgrounds of your students, the cultural and linguistic backgrounds? You're basically thinking about ways you could make that lesson even better. And then you're going to write about, well, what would be the next lesson based on everything they learned? What would the next lesson be? And it should not be, well, we just jump to the next series in the lesson. Like this was this lesson, and then it's prescribed that I'm going to teach this next. That's basically the opposite of what they want you to do. You want to show that, okay, my students are ready to go on to this next topic based on what they learned in this lesson. They can build on that for the next content specific lesson. And that's what you're going to want to show, is the connection between what they learned in the lesson, not just what you taught, but what they learned, and then what you're going to teach next based on that.
We can pick up a question. I have a couple of questions here. I've heard mention of citing curriculum materials used. Is this necessary?
Evidence-based, like UDL, you're going to want to reference any kind of UDL-based strategies you would reference. You don't have to go into detail about different research, but maybe you're doing some CDI methods and you would just explain that that's what you're doing.
I think they mean if they're using a district adopted curriculum as the basis for their lesson, like let's say you're doing a Go Math lesson as your basis. I responded they could do that, but they got to adapt it for their students' assets and needs. You can't just pull it off the shelf and use it. That's not connecting to students.
Right.
But I'm trying to remember if there's a place where you cite and actually say, I used Go Math. I don't believe so.
I don't think so. No.
Yeah, I don't think so.
No.
So, yeah. And then another question. I have 2 different grade levels, so the content is different. However, my focus student 1 is a different level than the lesson plan I'm creating. I need to pick a different focus student that is in the correct grade level, correct? So it's a combination class.
Well, when I've worked with candidates that have 2 grade levels in one class, they've just decided to focus on, they've done a lesson for, let's say it's a 3-4 combo. They've just done a lesson for the grade 3 or just for 4. But I'm sure if you explain the context, you could do that, but your 4th graders shouldn't have a 3rd grade standard.
Okay, next question. Where will we put our references at the end of the template? So do you mean the references in steps 3 and 4? If so, the referencing in step 3 and 4 is not done like formal APA or Chicago or MLA. You just in the context of your answer, you make reference to places in your TPA. For example, if it says, how does the assets and needs help you in developing your lesson? Say, well, in my template A, I learned about this. Then in my lesson, I did these things. It'd be that kind of a reference, informal reference, but a clear connection to some place. Don't just say kind of, yeah, I kind of learned about this. Directly cite where you're making a connection to, but it doesn't have to be APA formatting or any of that kind of stuff. It doesn't have any of that in any part of the TPA. How do we describe how they get on exit tickets or assignments in our reflection? Or how they do. For instance, 4 did great, 6 medium, 3 didn't get it. Well, when you're supporting your evidence for what you would do next, you could say on our exit ticket, I saw this. That's quantitative. They kind of give it some numbers. I would include qualitative descriptions. These are the kinds of things I saw my students could do according to the exit ticket I gave. That leads me to believe we should do this moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
In cycle 2, it gets a lot more technical than that. So cycle 1 is kind of monitoring students' progress. Cycle 1's monitoring. Cycle 2 gets into a lot more details than that.
Exactly. And your assessment should align with the learning goals and the standards. So they're all connected, and that's the emphasis, as Darrell said, in cycle 2, but still here in cycle 1, that's a great way to support what you would do next if your assessment, which could be an exit ticket, is assessing the learning goal. And if they can do that in the exit ticket, okay, they've met the learning goal, or wow, I have a group that didn't, or the whole class didn't, whatever it is. And that's okay. You don't have to have every student meeting the learning goals. I mean, that's not realistic. That's not true what happens in the classroom typically. So it's just you reflecting and understanding that if they didn't meet the learning goal, I'm going to need to work on that. And then you would explain what you would do.
Yeah, just to note, in your video, you have to annotate where you're monitoring student learning. That's one of the things you annotate for. So there should be evidence that you are monitoring student learning within and toward the end of the lesson. So monitoring for making adjustments in your lesson is the natural kind of monitoring you do, and then thinking about the moving forward lessons. And then in the part 4, you're able to reference that.
Right. And I want to break it down, monitor, because sometimes it seems so like official and when am I monitoring? You know what? When you're teaching, you're assessing learning all the time. I guarantee it. You're asking purposeful questions. You're doing observations. Okay, I'm teaching this. Are they getting it? And you're having maybe write something down. They're doing a whiteboard and you're looking. Wow, they're getting it. Okay, I can advance. I can go further. Or they're not getting this. I need to step it back and make an in-the-moment adjustment because they need to get it. I don't just go on regardless of how they're doing. So just know you are definitely monitoring learning all the time by all of the assessments you're doing. In the CalTPA, it's all about just writing that down, explaining what you're doing. And in a more specific way, you wouldn't just write, yeah, I'm asking questions. You should go in knowing at what point you're going to ask higher order thinking questions. Because I'll tell you, when I was teaching in high school, if I didn't go in with a higher order thinking question that I would ask my students, I would in the moment just revert to lower order thinking because you're doing a lot and it's easy to slip to that. So setting yourself up with, okay, purposeful questioning. These are some higher order thinking questions I'm going to ask, and I'm going to ask it at a certain point to assess where they're at. And that happens in your planning. You don't just wing it and I'm just going to ask a bunch of questions to find out how they're doing. Plan it in advance. Again, that's just really good. That's good teaching right there, where you're getting them to think. And you're also setting yourself up for success to be able to challenge the students.
All right, let me pick up a few more questions.
Mm-hmm.
I teach world history, 10th grade freshman seminar, which focuses on social emotional learning and is half the size, but has all 3 focus students. However, I'm a history teacher for the most part. Would either grade level work, or since my credentials tied to history, am I only able to do world history for EdTPA? Well, this is about CalTPA, so make sure you sign up for the right one with Pearson. I want to make sure that happens first. You sign up for the TPA that goes with your credential.
Yeah, it has to be specific. So you have to use the standards for your whatever credential you're going for.
So yeah, I'd focus on that. Let me grab a couple others. For multiple subjects, do you have a recommendation on which cycle we do ELA and which cycle we do math?
I have a recommendation.
Go ahead, Allison.
Okay, so for cycle 1, you're teaching 1 lesson. For cycle 2, you're teaching 3 to 5 lessons and then a follow-up lesson. If I were doing it, I would do for cycle 2 what I am most comfortable with. Where's my sweet spot? I feel good about this. I'm going to do that in cycle 2. What I feel less comfortable with, I would do for cycle 1 for the 1 lesson. If you're confident in both, great. You just decide whatever you want to do. But if you're stronger in one over the other, that's my recommendation. But ultimately, you can choose what you do.
That's a great point. Ours is integrated into our program, so we have a little more specific alignment to pedagogy. So I'll stay out of that question because that's just going to confuse people. I'm teaching virtually. Will that be a problem when submitting my TPA? No. We actually had lots of students pass when we were all online in the state. Go on to the state website and make sure you look at the requirements for online, though.
They have guidance.
Yeah, there's some specific guidance, and you want to make sure you meet those requirements, in particular how many students are being shown and some of those things. They'll help you out with that, but no, that's not a problem at all. In my reflection, can I talk about aspects that are not in my video clips? For example, if I need to adjust instruction, but it's not in my video clips, can I still write about it? Yes, you can. You can, in your reflection in step 3 and 4, you can reference anything that happened in your lesson, whether it ended up in a video clip or not. You do want to cite some evidence, though. You know, you might reference your lesson. Hey, in this part of my lesson, when I was doing it, this happened. It didn't end up in a video clip. Remember, the clips are only a total of 15 minutes. And typically, at the most, the lesson's much longer than that. So there's a lot of things that you've done. Yeah. If I have things to reference that weren't part of your 5-minute clips, should we say at 9 minutes in my video, I did X? No, you absolutely cannot reference anything that is not in the clip. So you can't say, hey, here I am connecting to prior knowledge. Man, you should have seen me greeting those kids right before this video clip. That won't be accepted for evidence. So only annotate for the stuff that's in there. That's why you want to plan those so you have it sitting there waiting for you. Okay. And then
Darrell, one sec. Can we go through this and then we'll get to questions?
Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So when you're done writing, so you got to know your students, you planned this fabulous lesson, you taught it, you reflected, you applied, it's all together. You're not done. It's an iterative process. You are not done just the first time. Please don't make that mistake and just say, okay, I have writing and everything, and now we're just going to send it off. Check your work using the rubrics. Remember, I said that was one of your best resources. And I told you how to go through it. Try to find the constructs in levels 3, 4, and 5 in your own work. That's you self-assessing. That's you giving the check. Okay, I see this. It's obvious. Make sure you have nothing from levels 1 and 2. And if you can't find evidence required in level 3, you know you need to revise your writing. You've got to spend the time to make it obvious. You're going to do this for all 8 rubrics. So plan in. So if you're planning, a lot of people will back map, like, okay, this is when I want to submit, then I'm going to back map what I want to do. Put in some time before you submit for you to do this self-assessment and check yourself against the 8 rubrics. Then once you're done reviewing with the rubrics and revising, then you are ready to submit to Pearson. When you are confident, you're feeling good, that's the time. A lot of people run out of time or don't see the importance of the self-assessment against those rubrics. And, you know, it sometimes doesn't end up great. So you are going to set yourself up for better success if you are doing this. And I think that's my last slide. Let's see. Oh, I wanted to share a roadmap, just a visual. I think visuals are nice. So the roadmap through cycle 1, first, get to know your students. Second, develop an engaging lesson based on what you learned about your students. And then record yourself teaching that lesson. And choose 3 video clips from the lesson that are up to 5 minutes long and meet the requirements. Remember to go back and know exactly what needs to be seen in each clip, and then annotate them. Then the next is reflect on what you learned from teaching the lesson, and then apply what you learned to the next steps for learning. And then this really important part, revise your writing using the rubrics, then submit to Pearson. So that's your roadmap through. And if you're trying to plan timeline, I would set dates to these different points in the roadmap. And okay, this is when I'm going to do this. And I like to back map. I think that's a great way to do it. Aim for a submission date that you want to do, and then back map to now what you need to do, set yourself up a timeline, because this is not something you can complete in 2 days, right? You can't just say, I'm going to just sit down, put my head down and just write. It doesn't work like that. You need more time to do it. And so just setting it up on a calendar is really helpful. And now, questions.
Okay, let's pick up a few questions.
Yes.
So someone asked, what type of lesson would you recommend recording for language arts for 2nd grade? I'll take that one. I would recommend a lesson that allows you to show higher order thinking, that allows the students to be actively engaged, that has an opportunity for you to do maybe a variety of showing your pedagogical skills, as opposed to something that's very lower order thinking. I always kid with my kindergarten TK teachers, don't do a lesson on how to write the number 2. That's probably not gonna do too much for you. That's gonna be kind of tough to show all the little pieces. If you use YouTube videos, boom cards, teacher paid teachers, do we need to cite and or add hot links? No, there's not a citing for where materials are in there. You're not citing that. In the activities, you might make reference to something that you're using. Allison, you want to add to that?
Right. I mean, essentially, you should be inspired. You could be inspired by other lessons, but you should be developing a lesson specifically for the students that are in front of you. That's how you really should be approaching it.
Yeah. Be real careful about just taking something off the shelf and just using it as it is, because it's really going to be difficult for that to match the students you have. Does the whole class need to be in the video? Would I be allowed to blur the face of a student who does not want to be recorded? If you have a student who cannot be recorded in your class, you can set the camera up so they're not included in the video. You'd show most of the class. Sometimes the technical piece of trying to blur a student could be considered editing, and you don't want to do that. Instead, place a student in a location, show the rest of the class, but not that student. That seems to be what we've had the best success in handling with that. And then you want to add to that, Allison?
No, but I do want to go back to your comment about not doing a lesson on how to draw the number 2.
Yeah.
Just want to expand that one of the ways to really set yourself up for success is to choose a standard that's more aligned with higher order thinking. Like you know, lower order thinking is also important in schools. And, you know, my son's in 5th grade, he is memorizing the states. I think that that's important, but memorizing the states is lower order thinking and not something you're going to be showcasing for the CalTPA. So you can be strategic in choosing a standard that's very much can be, I mean, you can more easily do a higher order thinking lesson versus memorization or just recall, or here I can draw a 2. You could still get to higher order thinking, but make it easier on yourself. Have them do something where they're comparing and contrasting, or, you know, really engaging in analysis. Those are things that can be done at every single level.
Yeah, thank you for adding that. All right. Is there a standard consent form for recording? Should I put in the consent form that those who say no to being recorded will be there that day? It is filmed, but in a section of the class that is not shown in the video.
So you have to get consent. So that's your responsibility. Most schools have their own consent form and process. If they don't, on the CTC website, they have a sample one that you can use in English, Spanish, and Arabic. So you can use their sample. You would always have to get it approved by your administrator, though. You can't just send things out to parents without that approval. But I would say 9 times out of 10, a school has their own form for this, and maybe they've already reached out and had maybe an opt-out option for filming in the class for educational purposes. And all school districts know, or they've been notified, that when a new teacher or a candidate is doing this for credentialing purposes, that they need to be allowed to videotape in the school. And so, you know, there's a lot of resources on the CTC website. If you really dig in there, they really have some great resources. They have a YouTube channel as well. Jump on there. I mean, they have the sample photo releases. They have videos on different aspects. They have guidance on if you're teaching hybrid. They have guidance if you're teaching online, how to use educational technology. They've really compiled a lot of resources, but I don't think a lot of people dig in and get there. It's not necessarily easy to find at first glance, but if you click in there, and that's the CalTPA CTC website, you can see some good resources. And if you need help with the Pearson system, it has a guide for that. You need help, how do I upload video and annotate to Pearson? They have a guide on that. So I think one of the underutilized resources is the actual CTC CalTPA website.
Yeah, thank you. Mm-hmm. If a student opts out of being recorded, is their voice allowed to be heard if they answer a question?
Wow, we're getting really specific here. I think that is absolutely fine. Just their face. It's no identifier for them.
Yeah, that's usually the issue. And I'm not going to do the cell phone one. A lot of people put some good ideas in there. I would say that for whatever recording device you use, you try it out first and try seeing what you get out of that recording, whether you use, I've had people use iPads and phones and old digital, I mean, they've all used all kinds of things very successfully. The thing to recognize is that what you upload into Pearson doesn't have to be super HD, 500 million megapixels per, you know, milli-inch or something. It's really just online video formatting. As a matter of fact, if you use too high quality, you'll have to compress it because they have a 500 megabyte. So really just Joe Basic, you can see and hear everybody is kind of what you want.
If you use your cell phone, I highly recommend putting it on airplane mode, because the worst is you're videoing, it's going great, you just nail this lesson and then you realize someone called in the middle of that.
Right.
And it stops the video recording. So put it on airplane mode. Just avoid that. Nobody can call you for that moment while you're teaching.
Yeah. Someone added, oh, there we go. I did respond to that. Let me take a look. Yes, CTC's Deep Dive Cycle 1 is a great companion to this presentation. They answer a lot of questions also. When does Cycle 1 end and when does Cycle 2 start? And what is the passing rate for both cycles? We'll start with the first one. As far as ending and starting, they end and start when you work on them. I would work on one cycle at a time. I don't know about Allison, but my experience has been that folks that try to do both at the same time tend to kind of conflate the requirements because the requirements are different and there's very little overlap between them. That's a nice revision they've made in this version since the old 4 TPAs. And I'd work on cycle 1 first, get that going, get a score back so you kind of know how your writing went and everything, and then dive into cycle 2. Cycle 2 tends to be a little more has a little more requirements.
Yeah, and I'll just add that you technically could submit cycle 2 before cycle 1. You could. Yeah. Developmentally, I would not do that. I would do cycle 1 first, get that done, and then go to cycle 2. If you're in a teacher prep program, there probably will be some guidance around that and what they want you to do. Some people aren't in that situation. We've got new teachers who were recommended on the executive order, working in induction in their first year. You can really set it for yourself, but I wouldn't try to just cram them, just the same reasons Darrell said. It starts to get really blurring when you're doing them both at the same time. So I would do cycle 1 and then cycle 2. Look at the submission dates. So you can submit it at any time, but there are submission dates that they go by. So after the submission date, it's 3 weeks to get it typically is 3 weeks to get your results. So if you submit a week before the submission date, it doesn't mean you get your results back any sooner. So you have up until that submission date, but I don't recommend submitting on the submission date. It's usually better to upload everything a few days before, just because the system gets really overloaded. Yeah, those are great. Those are great pointers. Someone asked, what's the, and then we'll do Kitty next. She has her hand up. Oh, yeah. What is passing rate for both cycles? Well, the people who follow this guide that we have told you, which is you plan everything out before you do your video recording, and then you take all your writing and you check it against those rubrics, the passing rate's extremely high. And so even with all the people in the whole state, this last state passing rates I saw were somewhere in the 70s, high 70s, somewhere in there. But yeah. but really, it varies. It varies. Depends on the institution, depends on the level of, my experience has been people that are prepared and that check their work and use the rubrics, they have no problem passing. Mm-hmm. Kitty? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So I have 2 questions. The first is, I'm the one who asked about teaching virtually. Can you restate that website that I need to go to with regard to following regulations for virtual? And then my other question is, as I mentioned, I started doing this last year, and I already started working on my forms and everything, and I just looked it up. The forms are not B5. It's actually, what did it say it is? I don't know. Oh gosh, I'd have to re-sign in again, but it's the last one, like 2 something. So do I need to, well, I don't know what it is. Do I have to now rewrite it in B5 or what's going to happen?
Okay. So I'm so glad you attended, because this is Very, very important. And I'm glad that you picked up on checking that you have an older version and the current version is version 5. So you definitely need to get all of your information in the version 5. Here's the good news. There is a lot of the same stuff. So you're going to spend your time copy and paste from the old template into the new template and just kind of reread, make sure that the question, the prompt hasn't changed. And if it has, then address that. And then there are some new prompts. Some have been taken out since the old version. But the first thing to do is just copy and paste over into the new one. And when you register in the Pearson system, you have access to all of the current templates. So yeah, I mean, I'm just so happy you're here because that little nugget of information alone is going to set you up for success.
Yeah.
Time and money. That was one of the first
Exactly.
things you said. And I was like, oh my gosh. And right away you were talking, I went and looked and I'm like, oh, great. It's the last form. So I the whole time I was like, oh man, do I have to redo the work? So you're saying it's not a lot of change, but I should really read through it and I can do a copy paste if it's pretty similar to what I wrote in the other version. Okay. And then, oh, thank you. I think you put the link for the, to find the virtual.
Yes, I went through and found it on the CTC website. This is the page that has the supports for hybrid and online learning. So
Thank
I
you.
posted that in the chat.
Thank you for that. Awesome.
Oh, hybrid isn't.
All right, Jerome, you have a question.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Allison. Really appreciate it. I'm faculty with Cal State Teach, and this has been so extremely helpful.
Oh, good.
And I was wondering how I would get a copy to share with my teacher candidates, maybe who wasn't able to attend tonight, and follow up and do and let them receive some of this amazing information.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. I'm glad it's helpful. We're just volunteering our time to help because we know it's needed across the state. So I'm glad it's helping. And so I'm going to take this video recording and upload it to the CCTE YouTube channel. And so we're an associated group to the California Council on Teacher Education. And we utilize their YouTube channel. And in CCT, I work with, I don't know if you work with Dr. Ernest Black.
Yes, that is my statewide director. I was with him today. We were doing some school visitations. Yes.
Nice. So I work with him. I'm
Excellent.
very familiar with, he's wonderful.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so we'll have it on that YouTube channel and I'll try to get it sent out through the CCTE listserv to try to just let people have the recording. I've received a lot of emails wanting, saying, I can't make it, but I want to see. And so we'll be sending that out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. And can I put my email in the chat, Dr. Allison?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Please send it to me directly and I'll get it to my teacher candidates.
Sounds good.
Thank you again.
You're welcome. Okay. Other questions? Let's see.
I actually have a question if you don't mind.
Yeah, I don't mind.
So the new version of the templates, you know, the version 5, on the lesson plan portion of it, I believe that it used to so I saw a sample given to me by my professor, and I think the older version used to talk about formative and summative assessments. Is it correct that the new version doesn't specifically ask about the formative and summative? Do you happen to know?
Yeah, for cycle 1, it's just assessing learning. For cycle 2,
okay.
Yeah,
so
cycle 2, it's more specific on the types of assessment. But for cycle 1, you just need to talk write about how you are assessing learning. So, you know, it could be,
Okay.
I'm doing purposeful questioning, I'm doing observation, but you would need to explain. So you would never write, I'm just observing, and then if I see that they're doing well, then okay. I mean, I
Right,
hope you
right.
all
But-
could see that that's not enough, right?
Right.
But those are assessments. And if you can explain them in exit tickets and, you know, I don't recommend doing thumbs up, thumbs down for multiple reasons, but you could include that, but that wouldn't be the only assessment you would use. I could go on and on about why that is not great.
Right, right. But maybe the one that I saw, maybe it was a cycle 2 lesson plan. I don't know, but it was an example for a cycle 1. And then also, this is kind of a silly question, but when I downloaded everything after I purchased it and purchased my cycle, my lesson plan, I don't know if it's supposed to be this way. It actually just says on it, step 1 plan, part B, sample lesson plan template. Is it supposed to say sample?
Okay. So this is a point of confusion for some people.
Yeah.
So it's optional, but here I'm going to make a case for you. Use the optional lesson plan template that they provide.
I can't find it.
It doesn't have any information in it.
When I
downloaded correctly in that case, but I want to just go on with this. It's an optional lesson plan template. So technically you could use maybe like the lesson plan that your program uses. And this is why I'm going to say that I recommend you not doing that. The assessors are looking for specific information. They are very familiar with the template. And while you could submit your own lesson plan, you could be leaving out some critical information, or it's really hard to find. And if the assessor doesn't find what they're looking for, then you might get a lower score. If you use the template, they know exactly what it looks like. It has the specific prompts. So it's just I think a better way to go, even though it's optional. Diane, it sounds like when you downloaded, it didn't fully download the document, because there should be more than just a header on there.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it downloaded like 5 different templates. It's, you know, the getting to know your students, it's the rationale, it's the sample one, it's the reflection one. But for some reason, because everybody keeps talking about the optional one, and I've tried it so many times, I've downloaded it 6 times. Like I literally have so many of them, and I'm like, how can this optional one not be in here? So I don't know what I've done wrong.
I don't know. I would reach out to the IT support with Pearson. So when you're logged in, you should find that. Or if you're with a program.
Yeah, I'm with UMass.
Okay. All right. Then you have them. Then you could email me directly and I can send those to you, since I'm a professor at UMass. So I'm happy to send you any templates you need.
Okay. Awesome. Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have a question. N. Rodriguez has a question about, just to clarify, I got a little confused earlier. An EL student cannot be Focus Student 1 in a dual immersion classroom that we are speaking Spanish. So it's Spanish all the time. It's dual immersion. Right.
You still need an English learner unless you are. This is the difficulty, but there is guidance on teaching in a dual immersion school on the CTC website. So there's some different nuances. If you're going for the multiple subject credential, you have to go by the multiple subject assessment. If you're going for teaching Spanish or any other language, it would be world languages, and they have a different requirement for FS1. So your best option is if you're going for multiple subject in a dual immersion school, there is specific guidance on the CTC website, and it lays it out exactly what your expectations are, when you need to translate, and what you need to do. But ELD is still expected. And I've supported candidates in dual immersion schools, and it has been a little more difficult. It's easier when you can choose to teach in English and do that as your lesson. Sometimes there's restrictions though, because some teachers are only teaching in Spanish or only teaching in, they're not teaching the English portion, especially with the younger grades with the percentages. But if you could get an opportunity to teach a lesson in English, it's easier to align cycle 1 and meet all the requirements. And it's a little easier because it's only one lesson. So you might want to consider that, but it is a little trickier when you're not teaching in English.
And then just to clarify, I'm using materials from a curriculum guide. My lesson, should I mention the template where I adopted the idea or material from?
You don't have, I mean, you can, if it's, you can, but you're not required. You're making it your own is essentially what you need to be doing. And therefore it is yours.
And then Caitlin has a question. Any tips for the possibility of needing to resubmit in the future for those of us that may not pass by 2 or 3 points? Well, what we do in our program is when folks don't pass, they meet for remediation with me. And we go through the rubrics. And the student checks their own work against the rubrics, and almost without exception, they find where what they submitted and what they wrote does not have the evidence that gets them the score to pass. So really that, we've said the rubrics a lot of times, but that's really your key to understanding, you know, why that score didn't pass. The only caveat to that is if you get 2 1s. And Allison gave a sad story, and I've had this happen too. You know, I've had really, really good submissions, except in the video, they didn't connect to prior knowledge, and they didn't connect to next steps for content learning, and those simply don't exist. That is 2 1s. There's no way to fix that. So if you got 2 1s in those areas, and that's why, then you have to think about redoing the lesson. And so that's why it's so critical at the front end, you plan for those things. that is the thing you don't want, the thing you want to avoid. Is there a limit to the number of times we can take it or fix our lesson to resubmit?
There's a limit to, can you say that again, Darrell? Sorry.
Is there a limit to how many times we can take it or fix our lesson to resubmit?
No, there's no limit. I will say after the 4th time, you're probably going to get a call from the CTC asking what's happening and why you're resubmitting so much from the support. They have customer support that does look at people who are, you know, submitting 5 times and what's happening. But there's not a limit. They're not going to stop you. There is a little caveat, and I don't think anybody's doing this, but preparation programs can decide on their own if they limit the number of times that their own candidates can submit. I have not heard of anybody doing that, but it is one of those, like the fine print. It is there that programs can do that.
And then Kitty asks, I think this is our last one. I'm a UMass, oh, here we go. Thank you, Dr. Smith, Mr. Blanks. This has been very helpful. I'm a UMass student. May I also get a version of the optional forms?
Yes, I will. I'm going to put for UMass students, I can help you directly. just because I'm a professor there. And I'll put my email in the chat for the UMass students specifically.
I had asked a question earlier. I'm not sure if it was answered. I got disconnected briefly, but I had asked for the multi-subject. Are we required to touch on multiple subjects, or can we focus on maybe ELA or history?
No, you have to submit one of your 2 TPAs in literacy and one of your 2 TPAs in math. If you try to submit 2, the same one, like you do math, the second math will get sent back.
Yeah, so it's your choice which one.
Whatever order you want, yeah.
Yeah. Some programs I've heard do require certain things. So if you are actively in a program right now, they might have guidance on, hey, for cycle 1, everybody's going to do math. For cycle 2, everyone's going to do literacy, or vice versa. UMass, that we don't require. You need to choose whatever you feel most confident with. Just know that one's got to be in math and one's got to be in literacy. You can't do both in the same. For multiple subject only. Single subject, you stick with your subject.
Thank
And
you.
I'm looking at the time. We are at 7:42, and I love the continued enthusiasm and dedication that you all have. I know there's a need out there, and we're recording this. We are going to be sharing the recording, and we have our next session. We're going to do CalTPA Cycle 2 next month. Here's the information. Darrell, I'm not sure if you've shared that in.
I'm going to share it right now. Drop that into the chat.
Okay, and I'm quickly now looking at the chat. Lots of thank yous, and you're welcome. We want you to do well. We truly do. And I hope that we were able to just break it down and make it a little more accessible than just looking at an assessment guide and figuring out, okay, this is what I've got to do. I know that can be daunting and it can feel like a lot. Just break it down. And hopefully we were able to talk through it so it's just more understandable. Okay. One last question, Kimberly, and then we're going to wrap it up.
Yes. So I was looking at our lesson B, the optional template. And what I'm noticing is that it's nothing like a regular lesson plan.
No.
I noticed that there's no parts for me to list the I do, we do, you do type of things. So do I need to add on to this template, or can I just do the template and submit that? You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. So I would never be able to use that lesson plan template to actually teach a lesson, right? Like I wouldn't look at that and be able to teach it. If you gave me a lesson plan and I would just then be able to teach from that template, no. But it gives a good idea of what the lesson is and the components and the kind of more theory behind it. So there's lesson plans that are more practical for when you're in the classroom teaching. And then there's this one. It's not the practical one for you in the classroom teaching. It just breaks it down. So this is what I would do if I were doing it. I would have my own lesson plan for teaching it and following that, but then I would put it and frame it within the lesson plan template to submit to CalTPA. Does that answer your question?
So you would add it in the template?
No, I wouldn't. I would take what I have written for my own personal lesson plan, and then I would look at the prompts and write to the prompts.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's a practical one to use and then the one that you submit.
Got it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right, everyone, thank you for joining us. We are excited for you all to do well and have a wonderful evening. Come to cycle 2 if you are interested in learning more about that cycle. It'll be set up exactly the same way as this. All right, have a good night. Bye.
Bye.